Latch the windows, lock the doors, and put the kids to bed. It's time for another episode of
Tales from the Garage!
Hey guys, I'm back. I haven't done a video for a while. It feels like a long time, but I don't think it really is that long. But I felt I was due, especially because my some friends of mine have got me beat like 4-to-1 videos, and I'm always thrilled when my friends put up a video, my close buddies, and then I feel like I kind of should reciprocate, and I haven't lately. Part of the reason, been a little down in the dumps. What can I say about that? Is it seasonal? I don't know. I love winter. I love the cold. I don't like going out in it anymore. My body doesn't adjust to the cold temps like it used to when I was young. But I kind of like the brisk cold air. Like I said, I don't go out in it. I like being inside for winter. Best time to listen to music in terms of seasonal, I think, is the winter. Everything seems to be so still outside, and you don't have any windows open, so there's none of that ambient noise coming in from outside. It seems easier in wintertime to concentrate on music. I don't know why. Partially, maybe it's because we get more hours of darkness. Much easier to listen to music when it's dark out, I think. And liking electronic music as much as I do, and I listen to it all year long, but especially in winter, there's something about electronic music that really connects to the wintertime for me somehow. So, but I don't really know what to do a video on. I was going to talk about my habit of making MP3 discs to play in my car. This is one that I made of Klaus Doldinger and Passport, his jazz band. And I have this CD wallet that has maybe 25 CDs in it, but they're MP3 discs. Fit about 8.5 hours of music on here, which is why this one has 11 albums worth of material. And I pretty much keep them down to one artist, so that Klaus Doldinger disc is all Klaus, nobody else. And I pretty much do that for just about all the discs I create. And I have this habit of the first day of the month, I put a new disc in. And usually, with it lasting 8.5 hours and me not being employed right now, I don't drive around a whole lot. I go to do my laundry once a week. I do food shopping. And in the course of a month, that doesn't equal 8.5 hours. So I rarely get through the disc, anywhere near it, actually. So in the course of the month of driving around, whatever that first day of the month is that I'm in the car, put the new MP3 disc in for the month, and I drive around and I listen to music. And that's what I do for the whole month. I pick up where I left off. And so lately, the last few months, I was looking for, one of those portable disc things that you have, is like a booklet about yo thick, that I must have had 75 discs in like this. Well, 75 discs, average 10 full albums to a disc. That's about 750 albums I had in this, portable compact disc carrier case, and I lost it. And I had, like 750 albums in there. So there's a lot of stuff. So I don't know where it is. I haven't been able to find it. I'm sure I brought it with me when I moved here 5 years ago. I thought I saw it after I moved here. I can't find it, so I've been left with recreating the discs. So a lot of times during the month, I'm like, okay, well, for next month, who am I going to listen to? And taking that artist and not knowing what albums to put on, because in this case, I have many more albums than this. I could fit probably 3 of these with my Klaus Doldinger and Passport albums. So which are my favorite 10 or 11, whatever I can fit on here. And what order do I put them in, which makes me listen to the albums. It's just one of those weird habits I have. So I spend a lot of time during the month listening to the albums by the artists that I think I'm going to be creating next month's MP3 disc by. And that's taken up my last few months of listening, instead of just listening to various stuff at home. But I have been listening to a bunch of things. And I made a couple CD purchases. Maybe I'll talk about that next time, because until I get a job, they have to be my last CD buys. So, in addition to trying to figure out what I'm going to listen to next month in my car to make the MP3 disc from, I have been mostly, not entirely, going through my back catalog and listening to albums here or there. I'm going to try to remember to include a link, because I discovered a free download online of an album that was only pressed. There were 50 CDRs of this album made by a guy I've never heard of called Dave Clarkson. And I discovered this album called Music for Lighthouses. And it's not really a music album. It's like an audio collage. But if you're into very, very ambient music, it essentially sounds like ambient music. It was funny because when I was first listening to it, the way that this sound collage is put together, I didn't realize at first that I wasn't actually hearing any music. It was all recorded sound, recorded over many years, starting in 1983. And with Dave Clarkson just carrying a tape recorder into these interesting places. I guess a lot of them were lighthouses. I haven't fully read everything on the webpage about it. And he kind of edited and put these audio collages together. And I can only think there's one of the 4 tracks. It's a 4-track, 40-minute album. And I can only think of one track where you actually hear something that sounds like a chord, a musical chord being held out. And I don't know where that comes from. It's probably an ambient sound that he picked up recording outside somewhere. Very interesting album. If you love ambient music, I'm going to suggest that there were only 50 CDRs printed up, and it's probably a few years old now. And I just stumbled across it accidentally. However, you can download the album, and you can download it for free or pay what you can afford to pay for it. And I'm going to try to remember to put up the link here for that, because I think a lot of people would really dig that. And you could download it in, high quality WAV files, FLAC files, or MP3 files, or whatever. I pretty much listen to all my music in the computer, so I just downloaded an MP3. But I listened to it like 5 times on the first day I downloaded it. Really creates a nice atmosphere that, oddly enough, I guess reading a little bit about it that I did, about how these recordings were made over the course of many years, starting in 1983, got me to think, and just compiled fairly recently in the last couple of years and put together. And it's very much like an audio picture of what Dave Clarkson must have seen and been experiencing when he was making these location sound recordings. They're not nature recordings, really. You're not hearing, like crickets and birds and that kind of thing. But when you hear it, it kind of has the sound of like abandoned places. That's the best way I could describe it. And it really had the effect of like triggering memories to me of places that I have been, especially if you travel alone and you go to places alone and you're not engaged in a conversation with somebody. So you're especially if you're in a place that's not heavily populated, and you travel somewhere and you're walking or you're somewhere out on your own, even in a car with the window rolled down or whatever, and there's not a lot of people around, you tend to take in the audio information of whatever's going on in the area, and assuming that it's not, traffic and cars and that kind of thing, can be quite an interesting experience. And listening to this album definitely started like almost triggering memories for me, as if I had done the recording and I had been there. And I was kind of having trouble thinking about what to do a video on when I heard this recording. And it made me think of something I've discussed before. And that's how Albums can trigger memories, which is a pretty obvious thing. Now, sometimes it's just the specific memories of when you bought the album, the record store you were in, or the guy you bought it from, or something that happened on the day you bought it. And then other times, and I don't think you have any control over this, it's much deeper than that. So I thought I would convey one of the most of my memories associated with albums. A lot of them are just I used to make back in the old days, make cassette tape copies of albums, play them in my car, and now 20, 30, 40 years later, when I listen to those albums, I still remember driving around listening to that cassette I had made of the albums, just in my car, just in my town, not even any special trips necessarily or anything. So a lot of the memories I have associated with albums aren't really very interesting tales to tell. It's more like this weird thing that triggers this very specific memory of just driving by a house or the pizza place that I used to go pick up my pizza from or something when I was listening to that specific John Abercrombie album or something. And a lot of these aren't really interesting stories to retell. They're, which is funny why I would remember them every time I listen to these albums, because they were just the everyday things. Most of them are just driving around in my, in my old town or something like that, while I was heavily into these specific albums that I had copied onto tape. So, however, one of the more deeply impressed memories I have to do with a Tangerine Dream member's solo albums. I pulled out all the ones I have, and it's not so much that this is going to be about Chris Frank, but I thought I would show he has a lot of discs out. But the ones that I'm going to recommend are, probably the first 3 or 4 that I show. So I had a really good, my closest friend in the world, moved from here in New Jersey, where I met him and knew him for a number of years, moved to Florida initially. And, I should have asked him what year it was, but it was well over 20 years ago. And which is amazing to me, because if you asked me, I would say 6 or 7, except for I know that he lived in Florida for over 10 years. From there, he moved to Louisiana for over 10 years, and now he's living in Nevada, and he's been there for a couple of years. So it's probably closer to 25 or 30 years maybe, but I have trouble believing it was that long. However, I was already into and interested in Tangerine Dream, and it just so happened that in the winter time, which is fitting, it was exactly this time of year. It was whatever year it was January, and it would have been. I have to look at these. It would have to have been in the early 90s. And I hadn't yet bought any of Chris Frank's, longtime member of Tangerine Dream. I think he left in 87, 87 or 87, I think he left the group after being in it for like 17 or 18 years. I hadn't gone so far, as to purchase any of his own discs. And I did just at about the same time that my friend told me, I knew he was preparing to leave Florida and move away permanently. And, I was always buying albums and listening to them. And I picked up the only 2 that were available at the time, Chris Frank CDs, which were his debut solo album, which was on Private Music. No, Sonic Images. I don't know why I thought it was on Private Music. Sonic Images, which was his. Oh, it was originally on Private Music, but he had started his own label, Sonic Images, and it was his only Private Music label. And that's Pacific Coast Highway, which is really the first album to get by him. The albums that he made, you pretty much want to pick up in the sequence that they were made, interestingly enough. But this is the one if you're only going to have one to get. Made mostly not so much of the time period that you would associate him with Tangerine Dream, which was a very electronic sound, but also long compositions for the most part, at least up until the late 80s, just before he left when they started doing shorter works. These are all short works on here. There's like 10 or 11 tracks or 12 tracks, whatever. I didn't count them. All short, like 5-minute and under pieces. And interestingly enough, they don't have the electronic sound of Tangerine Dream. They're, all electronic, synthesizer oriented, but came out in 1991. But there's a much softer sound to them. I dare say pretty, but pretty in a kind of like reflective way. Not in a like new age, you should meditate to this kind of way. Very noticeable themes in these music, in these tracks. And this was 91. And some pretty things, some things that you could even listen to and say, oh, that's kind of sad, and reflective. And you could definitely see, listening to this, his future, really his main work, after this was soundtracks, which is still what he does. He did do, I want to say, he did do the Amazing Race TV show soundtrack for many years, and a new season just started. I have to look at the music credits to see if he's still doing it. I know the prior season of Amazing Race, he was still doing the music for, which makes it at least a dozen seasons of that he did the music for. But he did movies, etc., etc. But when this came out a few years after he left Tangerine Dream, I was kind of expecting that you would have, these annual releases of his studio albums, but they pretty much trickle down to almost nothing after the first few. But this has a lot of pretty sad themes to it. Definitely, I think, the best writing as far as his solo stuff goes. At the same time I bought it, which was also a new release. So this came out in 91. I guess I picked it up in 92 because I picked it up the same time I picked up this album, which came out in 92, the London concert. So it seemed like, Chris Frank at the time was going to keep on pumping out, one a year solo albums or so. And this is interesting because looking back and reading about it now, I read this was the only live performance he ever did as a solo artist. Thankfully, he recorded it. There's a guy, Richard Roth, I think his name is. Richard Roth, who performed, I guess, on keyboards along with Chris Frank, and a lot of sequencers going on. This is more in the Tangerine Dream mode. There's a few tracks on here that sound to me like studio recordings at the end of the album, and they're short 4-minute pieces. But there's a couple longer pieces. Most of the live stuff are 5 or 6 minute pieces. And Purple Waves, which I think was on a Tangerine Dream album from the 80s, 16.5-minute version of that. So that definitely calls up the more of the Tangerine Dream stuff that he did, that was longer in terms of the way the tracks ran. Interesting album. The 3 or 4 tracks that end the album, and it's hard to tell whether they're really studio or live. It's that good quality of a recording. Also kind of continue that kind of sad, reflective theme a little bit of this album, of his first album, while the earlier pieces that are definitely live and a bit longer have a bit more of the electronic Tangerine Dream thing to them. So this is another good one. This would probably be the second one to get out of his collection. And this is on, again, Sonic Images, which was his label. One of the labels that he started. I don't understand. Like Brian Eno, he keeps starting these labels and then stops and creates another label a couple years later. But it also came out on Varice Sarah Band, which is strange because that is a classical label. And what happened is it seems like he, after this, released a whole lot of albums on the Very Saraband label, but most of them were orchestral music that he had composed for films. I was going to show the rest of the Chris Frank collection, and maybe I'll do a part 2 where I'm just talking about Chris Frank. But my original thoughts, were based on those 2 albums because I had just picked up those 2 albums at the time that my friend told me that he was all ready to leave for Florida, and I had started listening to them. And I even made a cassette copy. That was still in the age of cassettes before really you had portable boom boxes with CD players and that kind of thing. And I had just bought the Chris Frank CDs, and I was heavily listening to them and was a little, listening to those sadder, more reflective pieces. And it was hitting home a bit because I knew my friend was getting ready to move, and I didn't know the exact day. It was more like he had preparations to do, and he wasn't sure what exact day everything was going to fall on. But it was January, and it was pretty much in the midst of one of our first snowstorms of the year. It was freezing out. I remember I got sick even. It was the first cold I had had for several years. And he called me and said, well, he's ready to move, and he had rented a truck. He was doing all the moving himself. He had rented a moving truck and was going to pack all his belongings into the back of the truck, and the idea was I was going to help him. Behind the truck, he had a little trailer that was towing his car. So he had everything, with him, all his worldly possessions, on that one trip from Jersey to Florida. I don't know how long the drive would have taken if we did it straight away. But it took us like 3 days for a whole lot of reasons. The roads were bad with snow. He couldn't drive that fast. He was, driving this big, noisy, coal truck that the heat never really worked in. And he could only drive so fast because he was towing his car behind him. His cat was in there in a little cat carrier. So, we ended up spending several days in, whatever hotel room we could get to at the end of the day, or when he got tired of driving. I didn't do any driving. And I had this cassette of the Chris Frank albums, amongst other things, that I was attempting to play. I had my boom box that took like eight huge C-size, I guess they were C or D-size batteries, because I knew that the rented truck wouldn't have a cassette player. And the problem with the truck was so noisy, you could really never hear the music. It was just fucking noisy. And, and I don't mean a hum. I mean, it was just a rattle trap the whole time. And it was quite an experience. You're driving in the cold winter, driving through, all the states. I'm very bad with geography. Was it Georgia that we passed through? It was absolutely freezing, oddly enough. I don't recall, but it was cold everywhere we went, pretty much until we got to Florida, I guess because of our timing. And I'm trying to listen to this Chris Frank thing sitting in the passenger seat on the boombox, turned up all the way, but I really couldn't hear it. I had memorized a certain amount of it, so I kind of knew what was playing. But for my friend, he wouldn't have been able to hear any of it, simply because he wasn't already familiar with it. And, so it was quite a sad thing. It seemed like it took an awful long time to hit Florida. It took several nights, I know, because I remember staying at least 3 nights in hotels before we got there. And, then getting to the apartment that he had rented and moving the stuff in there. And I stayed overnight there. He had a second bedroom, actually, in his apartment, which was a pretty small apartment, but it actually had 2 bedrooms, small living area and kitchen. That was it. And yet, oddly enough, 2 bedrooms. And so I can recall, sleeping on a fold-out bed kind of thing in the second bedroom, and, with my boombox now inside the house. And I didn't have a lot of ambient music to listen to with me. I was thinking primarily of things to listen to driving in the truck on the way there. So the Chris Frank thing was pretty much probably the most laid back stuff I had. So I listened to it also at night there in the guest room alone, and with all these kind of sad memories because I was heading back to Jersey. How did I had a flight back. I'd actually booked a ticket to fly back home with all my stuff, my boombox and everything. And it was quite an event. Nothing terribly exciting happened when we got there. I saw the area and the place that he was going to be living in and the apartment. He only stayed there for a year before he went and bought a house in the area. But all those memories, oddly enough, I was not thinking of at the time. I cannot listen to these albums without recalling that time. And I mean in vivid detail. I kind of wish I could just sit and enjoy them a lot of times. But I just have that association with that. And am I hearing things that aren't in the music? Well, the music is quite a bit on the reflective side. There's no doubt about it. And they're excellent albums that are pretty much out of print now. Copies should be around. There were enough of them made so that I guess there's various used and maybe even some new sealed copies still in existence somewhere, like on an eBay or something. But it's really, these are great albums. It's very hard for me to listen to them. I might, end up doing another video just showing the other batch of Chris Frank albums I have. He's done a lot of compilations, and a lot of the compilations are based off the material from especially his first album, the Pacific Coast Highway album, which I recommend you guys pick up if you think you might be interested in hearing him, especially doing something very kind of different from Tangerine Dream. So I think that's it, for now. I just wanted to talk about something I've spoken about before, and that is music and memories. And, as boring as that story may have been, I think it's interesting that I just can't listen to either one of those albums without recalling, or even any of his compilation albums or remix albums that he's put out where he used some of that material. So even though technically they're different versions that sound a little bit different, they sound enough alike, the original versions on those first two albums, that makes it so that I go back to that place, that January. It's weird. It's weird, the effect that music has on us. So, not really a Chris Frank, I guess, discussion here. I could show the other dozen or so things I have by him, which are mainly soundtracks. But maybe I'll do that some other time, just, to try to keep this under 8.5 hours. So that's it. I will be back as soon as I can find, a subject, that I can think of that might be interesting to talk about. So, thanks for watching. Hope everybody's doing well. Oh, and if you're so inclined, if you're somebody that hasn't watched a lot of my videos, I didn't prepare for this, so I don't know if I can pull these off the shelf. I can't get them off the shelf, I don't think. I could, but about 100 things would come tumbling down. I'm going to try. Hold on. Yeah, this could be a mistake. Well, I kind of did it. I could see there's things perched on there that are now ready to potentially fall and break. CDs, of course. For those folks that may be watching my videos that are new to my videos, maybe. I've gotten a lot of new subscribers, but I primarily my new subscribers, I think, are more interested in the albums that I post, the out-of-print albums, than me actually talking. And the proof of the pudding of that is, I might post an album, and within a couple months it may have over 3,000 views, and my little videos here, I'm lucky if I get 20 or 30. But I have to say this because I've now been unemployed for like 2 years, and I'm really not earning anything at all. But I will include a link. I'm gonna remember to put to include a link for that Dave Clarkson Music for Lighthouses album. But I'm gonna include a link for my music, and you can actually hear some of my own music. Actually, pretty much the complete albums right here on YouTube at various locations. I'm gonna include links to that, so you might have to dig down. Oh boy! See, I knew that was gonna happen. See? Stuff fell off the shelf. I told you that was going to happen. I got things all over the floor now. But that's life. So I was saying I haven't been earning anything from my music now for some time. And I have at least 2 albums that are pretty much up here on YouTube in full. And you can go and listen to them. And maybe if they tickle your fancy, you can go and order them. There's one of them, which is probably the best introduction because there's a lot of different pieces with a lot of different flavors, and acoustic and electric. And here's a more recent one that's basically 2 very long pieces on it. One's almost like a classical thing, and the other one's purely electronic. But this one's called 2 Views, and this one's Impressions of a Year. So they're out there to be downloaded or purchased or, purchased physically at CD Baby for the most part. One of the few places that actually has them physically. For some reason, the 2 Views album, I don't know, it should be available physically everywhere, but it's not. So you might have to go to CD Baby to pick that up. Or CD Universe, I think, has physical copies. The CD Baby's cheaper. But I know that the actual CD of Impressions of a Year is, for some reason, that CD is available on Amazon and everywhere else. So that's my plug. I have to do plugs because I have no money coming in, and I have a lot of obvious expenses. Living in New Jersey, my property tax for a tiny little condo is about $5,000 a year. And that's not even counting my maintenance fees that I have to pay hundreds of dollars every month for. But just my property taxes alone, which is ridiculous. $5,000 for property tax for a tiny little, 1-story place like I have here is just ridiculous. But, one chunk of that is due on February 1st. So, what can I do? All right, guys, thanks for watching. If you've watched this far, the links will be in my description. You're probably going to have to scan down a little bit to see everything, but I'll put them there. So thanks for watching, and take care, and I'll be back soon.